So we are very lucky to have our next speaker with us. He is here accompanying his teacher who is sitting on the panel right now. His name is Markeith Jones, and he is a current 11th grade student at the Detroit School of Arts. He's been generous enough to share the experiences within the Detroit public school system, so let's give him a warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Markeith Jones.
Why you make me go up here?
So hello everyone, my name is Markeith Jones. I'm a junior at DSA High, which is the Detroit School of Arts.
Hello, my name is Candace Martinez. I'm a senior at Cass Technical High School.
Okay, so hello. So yes, I am a junior at the Detroit School of Arts. I'm also a dance major there, and it's a performing arts school in Detroit, and it's presented to be a magnet school of the district. Years ago, our school was taken under the wing of the University of Michigan, but instead of providing more resources to our school, all they've done is reinforce the false and destructive educational policies. The university has stripped our school of what it used to be. A place where you would go to major in whatever art you decided you liked. But over the past few years, they have fired the teachers who provided classes like 3D programming, or a class where you could record your own song and you learned how to produce your own music, hands-on, all while you were in school. We attend a school being chartered by the University of Michigan, yet none of those students are getting in, and programs are constantly being extracted and stripped of its properties that made them worthwhile. And this unjust treatment is not limited to DSA, but this occurs throughout the entire district. We, as students, are forced to take outrageous and abusive standardized tests that are racist and built for us to fail, as well as attend school at these buildings that are infested with mice, moldy walls, leaky ceilings, and at some schools we even have bed bugs. But since they don't pose an immediate threat, the state won't do anything about it. DPS students are treated as second-class citizens and held at unliteral gunpoint to eat these conditions. These are conditions that are not present in schools in suburban school districts, such as those in Grosse Pointe, which is literally across the street from the east side of Detroit. At Marquette Elementary, which is a school we as BAMN and as the Detroit Federation of Teachers held a picket at last month, where students were being handcuffed by the principal. Or how about us as students being harassed and beaten by the administrators and maced by security staff? And this is not a joke. Us as students are constantly treated like pawns and commodities, constantly told every day at these schools that we aren't good enough or we aren't worth anything. But that's why us as BAMN and the youth leaders of the New Mass Movement stand on the positive program that we do. So we can stop these conditions from existing and make sure that opportunity exists for everyone and that we have access to a public education system worth attending. These abusive principals need to be fired. New buildings for all DPS schools are long overdue. Class size reduction is something that needs to happen right now because there's no real way education is taking place in classrooms with over 47 students on average across the district. It's about time we start getting the teachers we need back into our schools and the programs that have been stripped away from us returned. As Detroit students, we are not expected to amount to anything or have a future. At Renaissance High School, one of the top schools in Detroit, McDonald's applications were sent out to the graduating class. This is unacceptable. These conditions are the reason why mobilization is so important and why we as students and teachers and as youth leaders need to take action and fight for these demands. The only way to win these demands is to take the fight to the streets. Mass actions, pickets, marches, sit-ins, walkouts. Now's the time the people like the governor, the Stillman Foundation, Eli Broad graduates, emergency managers, and the University of Michigan School of Education get their hands out of our schools for the crippling of our public education system and the dismantling of our city to cease, and for these entities to be held accountable, and for DPS in Detroit to be the thriving school district and city it was, and what we can be once again.
From Detroit.
Okay. First.
Hello? Okay. First, let's be clear what educational reform means. What educational reform has come to mean is the opposite of improving education. The reformers in Detroit and across the big cities across the nation are not there to improve the schools at all. They have never had a plan to improve the schools of Detroit. Their one plan is destroy public education, privatize it, and profit off of it. So the obstacles to that have been the students and the people of Detroit saying, we want our public schools, who have twice rejected mayoral takeover, right? Who have over and over and again said, we, like every other community, deserves a publicly elected school board. And of course, they're not always going to be perfect, but we have the chance to elect them. First of all, what other community is there any discussion of any other governance model except for in largely Black, Latino, poor cities of this country? No other community would accept it. No community, the majority white suburban communities would accept anybody coming in and saying, we think we know how to run your schools better than the people you elected to do it, so we're just going to kick them out and take over. No way. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable anywhere. It's not acceptable for Detroit. So, if you want to talk obstacles to quality education, there are real obstacles, and those are racism and greed. It's really that simple. What Detroit needs is equality. We don't have a failing school system, but the crisis is not of failing schools or bad teachers. It's a crisis of inequality. And the DFT and BAMN are standing up and organizing to mobilize to say we demand equality. Until we have the equal funding and resources and student-teacher ratios that match those of our suburban peers, and the Detroit students are the peers and equals of every other student in those wealthier districts and deserve equal resources, those are the obstacles to quality education. I have 35 to 40 students in all of my classes. I would love to be doing a lot more in-depth project work with them. I don't have the resources. I don't have computers in my room. I have disposable books, literally like throwaway newsprint test prep books. Those are my textbooks that I get. It's unjust, it's unfair, it's unequal, and we're not accepting it.
Respond to that, given my dissertation, is one barrier is, have you heard of Proposal A? Proposal A was a major change to the funding formula in 1994. And so what happened was Governor Engler, as Professor Pedroni was talking about, he had a penchant for charter schools. And in order for charter schools to be established in the state of Michigan, he had to change the funding.
In terms of like pupil, however much a district or a school gets paid per pupil, and like if you like really want to talk about racism, how about the fact that like they're telling like Detroit students, like you're only worth $7,500, and if you go to a white suburban neighborhood right outside of Detroit, like they're getting $14,000 per pupil. And like if you really want to talk about racism, just come to any Detroit public school. 20,000. And then like if you really want to see the conditions, just like DPS's new slogan campaign, see it to believe it. If you really want to believe it, come to any Detroit public school system and go to a school in Grosse Pointe and you compare the conditions. And that's all I have to say about that.
Public school district. And I'm curious, I would like to hear everyone's perspective. If you know of any schools
that are successfully mitigating some of these barriers or challenges? And if so, how are they doing that? And are they working with families and community?
Before I answer that, Catherine reminded me that that was the other thing that came out from the coalition. That was a demand of the DFT that the debt completely canceled. The debt incurred under the state takeover needs to be completely forgiven. Marquise made the point, but I just want to say one more time that I never said there is not money. There is unequal distribution of the money. There is absolutely the money in this society to provide for all of our schools, which leads into a great example. I used to teach at the Catherine Ferguson Academy for Young Women, and when I started teaching, we had a full complement of social services, social workers, other agencies at the school, 2 nurses on staff, daycare, because it was for young women who were pregnant or parenting, full teaching staff so that our classes were limited to 18 students per class, and just any other resources that the students needed we could provide. Teachers were paid to teach after school, night classes, and that works. That is what works. And those students are absolutely worth the investment for all of those programs, and those programs should be in every Detroit public school, and the money is there to do it. We just have to build a movement with direct mass action, like Marquis said, to demand that those funds be placed where they are needed.
And next we'll move it on to Leon.
So the question was examples of mitigating some of these issues. So you can Google this. I briefly read about a superintendent in Camden who is using the I guess you would say a portfolio model. And so the reason why I think he may be, and you Google Camden superintendent
Education and politics. There seems to be a lot of actors involved. You have community centers, nonprofits, foundations, DPS, the EAA, emergency manager, the state itself. And it's kind of interesting in terms of where does the community and the families, where are they within that conversation? So in your general perspectives, how would you define that landscape with so many actors? And how would you characterize the involvement of families and communities? And we can start down this way, so Catherine.
Sure. So I don't have as much detailed background about the context.
I would agree that it does us well to remember our history, and that it was a civil rights movement and a revolution in the form of the Civil War that won public education rights in the first place in this country. And we are at a point again in our history where we need to build a new civil rights movement of students, community, youth-led, to demand those educational rights be given to the students who deserve them. With no elected school board, with the Coalition for the Future of the School Children of Detroit, that's a complete sham. It makes it necessary that once again we build a grassroots civil rights movement, and like Marquis said, we take it to the streets and we demand that the power be restored to the students to determine their own education in the future.
So, the question is, given that schools are run by a multitude of actors, and then so on and so forth. So basically, like, all of those, like, people and all of those, like, entities, they are for, the destruction of public education. And So those people are for, like, the destruction of public. I cannot read what I wrote. Okay. So those people are for the destruction of public education, and, like, if you want to talk about, like, so, like, the schools were, like, like, the anchors of communities, and, like, the schools, like, were places where like people could go, you know, to like get away from like the like abuse that they, you know, like faced at home and like the rest of society. Like we used to have like programs and all these other things, and now that like we really don't have that anymore. Like you saw it with like CFA, which is the Catherine Ferguson Academy, where it was a school for, you know, like nursing and pregnant young women. And you know, like that is a really hard position to be in as like a teenage woman, you know, and they closed that school down. And the same thing as like the Detroit Day School of the Deaf. It was the only school in the Detroit public education system that was like for like hearing, like people with hearing impairment, and like they closed it. And so like we really have to build a mass movement and make sure that like the people can like be empowered, and that like these people who are for like the dismantling of our city, and these people who are for like the dismantling of our public education system, like gets like make sure they're removed, and make sure they have nothing to do with Detroit, make sure they have nothing to do with like anything or anywhere, and just like yeah, and like it is true that like we are at a point like where we can change something. Like yes, the movement is at a point, and we do have enough momentum in the movement to start making like the real progressions towards like the public education system that we need in Detroit, and getting like the things that were like stolen from us back. Like we are at a point where we can like get those things back, and we saw it like, you know, like just the fact, you know, that's it. But yeah, like we are in a movement where we can like get our programs back, get our schools back, and it's time for us to use this momentum and start taking action and start mobilizing and keep building the mass movement and keep like leading this youth-led, you know, movement. And yeah.
Number of schools in Detroit, the decreasing number of school children in Detroit, and increasing number of schools, persistent underperformance on standardized tests. A plausible solution is often to consolidate and close schools. Yet, schools closing is a very traumatic experience, and that people feel abandoned, undervalued, and unintelligent. What is your interpretation of schools closing? What would you recommend the process be for closing a school, and how should the community be involved, if at all? And I'd like to start over here.
Oh, okay.
Either.
You can take down the microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, you can go.
Okay, that's easy. Don't close schools.
Yes!
When I read this question, I thought it was strange that it says there's an overwhelming number. There are not an overwhelming number of schools in Detroit. The number of people are left because their schools were shut down. My interpretation, closing schools, is a tactic. It's a very clear strategy used to destroy neighborhoods and drive people out. That's what's been done in Detroit. The neighborhood I live in the past 10 years, 2 out of 3 schools have been closed, and my neighbors with kids left after their schools closed. So, stop closing schools. And what it takes for that to happen is what it took at CFA. We did keep it open for 2 years after their first attempt to close it, was a sit-in occupation by students and myself with a mass mobilization of supporters to the school to say we're not letting it be shut down.
Okay, yeah. In total agreement with Nicole, the first step to the problem is stop closing schools. And yes, it is why people left, because their schools were closed. Like me as a student, I was going, so I attended Northwestern High last year as a sophomore, and there were students who were coming all the way from the east side, coming to Northwestern, which is a neighborhood school in the west side of Detroit, bordering Midtown. And so, that's the first step you can do. And in terms of what role the community can play, Like, we can do the exact same thing that we did at CFA. We can do the exact, where we sit in, and like, we make it that much harder for them like to close that school. Or like what we did at the Lincoln Library on the east side of Detroit, where we sat in and it was like the local library of the neighborhood, and they were trying to close it. And what we did was like, we sat in and we like as BAMN and as the community, like, we did a sit-in at that library, and when the mover vans came, like, we went and took stuff off the trucks and put it back in the library. And so, like, that's some of the things that, some of the role that the community can play, like, just mobilize against, like, those powers that are trying to, like, close our schools, close our libraries, close our community centers, like, and make it, like, impossible for them to do that, so.
Just want to add one more. On the standardized testing, standardized tests have always been used to exclude people from education, not as a way to improve or promote equality in education. So we need to tell the truth about that. And anytime test scores are being used as an excuse to shut down schools, that's a complete lie. And we need to speak that truth anytime we hear that.